The McCormick Observatory's telescope was built in 1883 by a company named Alvan Clark and Sons. A little bit of history about Alvan Clark was that he was originally an artist who painted small portraits and created watercolor artwork. It wasn't until later on that he was noticed for his lens manufacturing work. That is when he created Alvan Clark and Sons Company with his two sons, George Bassett Clark and Alvan Graham Clark. So how did this family business actually make the Great McCormick Observatory Telescope, which was the largest telescope during the time it was made? Well, first he worked on the lenses. His glass was supplied by Chance Bros and Company to be used as optical discs. He received two homogeneous discs by them, one of crown and the other of flint material. The flint was a biconcave lens, and the crown was an equiconvex lens. These were used to obtain the achromatic focus. An achromatic focus brings red and blue wavelengths into focus to see the night sky better. When Alvan Clark received the disc from Chance Bros and Company, he would first polish the disc. This is so that it could be tested for evenness and purity. If a glass wasn't what Clark wanted it to look like, even after polishing it, the glass would be rejected. The grinding and polishing of the disc was done on a turntable, which was rotated by steam power. The table held a cast iron lap that had a reverse curvature as the lens. The lens was held on the rotating lap and slowly moved. The large lens of the 26¼ inch of the McCormick refractor was fitted with 4 wooden handles during this process. 2 workmen would walk around the table, giving the lens the proper adjustments that it needed. When the grinding was finished, the secondary polishing began. A pitch was used to prevent the lens from sticking and being filled with water and other materials. One fact about Alvan Clark and Sons was that they never used cloth polishers, which people would have thought otherwise. For a large lens such as the McCormick Observatories, the lens was placed on the metal lap with a piece of Brussels carpet to separate it. The pitch would move back and forth on the rotating lens. When this was all done, a method that Alvan Clark made up called local correction was used. Local correction was used to obtain the sharpest possible focus rather than trying to solve for true mathematical curves. To do this, Clark used a point source of light to use as his focus point. He would look through the lens, and if the figure appeared to illuminate uniformly, then it was a perfectly figured lens. The location of irregularities would be marked with red powder, where those areas would be retouched. The inner surfaces of the 2 lenses were separated by a distance that depended on the aperture. Moving on to the telescope tubes. These tubes were made of a light metal such as thin tin. The thin tin was overlaid with paper and paste until there was a substantial amount of thickness. Afterwards, it was then sanded, which was then covered with several coats of paint to make it pleasing to the eye, as Alvan Clark said. On the side of the tubes were vents to allow free circulation of air between to equalize the temperature of the glass and external air. The tubes were made by riveting steel plates together, which made the metal tubes weigh less, but yet they were stiffer than the wooden ones of Alvan Clark's older telescopes. Most of this work was done by other men, while Alvan Clark primarily worked on the lenses. The final length of the telescope tube was 32 feet long and 31 inches in diameter. Clark didn't work on the project by himself though. Warner and Swasey Company made the double eyepiece micrometer and mount for the telescope. For the micrometer, it had a sharply defined wires and was uniformly bright in all positions to avoid stray light in the field of focus. It was used to measure celestial distances too far within the field of view of a single eyepiece. The distance between the eyepieces had to be measured by calibrated lines ruled on a rectangular glass plate. This plate was placed under the eyepiece of the micrometer. The tube, objective, and micrometer of a 9.6 aperture refraction was mounted inside a shortened tube of 26¼ equatorial as a guiding telescope. As for the mount, it was cast iron and heart-shaped like. It rested on a 2-ton block of sandstone, which rested on a pier of stone and brick 18 feet below the surface. Along with a micrometer and mount, the telescope had a driving clock that had a spring governor that is used to impart smooth motion to a chronograph. It was regulated by a conical pendulum whose isochronism, which is the equal duration of time, was done by an electromagnetically controlled friction paddle. The pieces were then put together to make the telescope that we know today. All of this construction of the telescope started 13 years before 1884, when arrangements were made, but had to be delayed because of financial difficulties, which my partner Aishwarya will now talk about.
For the donation of the telescope, one of the major decisions was which university would get the telescope. The decision was between Washington College, now known as Washington and Lee, and the University of Virginia. On March 15, 1870, Charles Scott Venable wrote to Leander McCormick explaining why UVA would be a more suitable option. Venable expressed his confidence of the growth of UVA for many years to come. He stated that UVA had a broad literature foundation in equipment and capacity for extension. Venable illustrated that UVA places emphasis on higher education in astronomy at a more significant level than Washington and Lee. He said that an observatory placed here would in this way match greatly the study of the noble service of astronomy. McCormick decided that UVA was the best institution to donate the telescope to. However, this was not finalized until 7 years later. This was due to the fact that the Chicago fire in 1871 caused the McCormick family a lot of hardship. Leander McCormick lost his home in the fire, and the family lost some valuable property from their company, which caused delay in the donation process. In 1878, Liley from Washington and Lee wrote to McCormick telling him that McCormick's offer of the telescope to the University of Virginia ought to pass without opposition. Liley went on to say that if UVA met McCormick's requirements, then he would want UVA to have the telescope. He also states that if UVA is unable to come up with the $30,000 needed to match McCormick's donation, then he would be able to raise those funds at Washington and Lee. However, if he is unable to raise the appropriate amount of funds, he wants however much he did raise to go towards having the observatory at UVA. He expresses how he does not want to interfere with McCormick's donation to UVA. On August 16, 1881, the site of the observatory was chosen as recorded in the Board of Visitors Minutes of UVA. Professor A. Hall of the United States Naval Observatory helped examine various sites for the observatory. In the end, Old Observatory Mountain was decided to be the best location due to the fact that there would be minimal disruptions from the vibrations of railroads. This hypothesis was proven to be correct when 3 people observed the passing of the railroads and felt no vibrations occurring. It was important that there were no vibrations because this would cause the telescope to vibrate, making it very hard to achieve accurate calculations. To be sure, this process was repeated another night and still no tremors were felt. Seeing as how this location was an ideal spot for an observatory, Leander McCormick agreed to build the observatory with the maximum cost being $18,000. Between July and December in 1881, as expressed by letters from Venable to McCormick, the conditions requested by McCormick have been discussed with the Board of Visitors and have been agreed on. The committee stated that there was a need for a temporary appointment for the astronomer and director position. However, this was less ideal than having a permanent astronomer who was devoted to his work. This was one of the difficulties they faced during the process of creating a functional observatory. As exemplified in the Board of Visitors minutes, Leander McCormick donated a telescope in order to encourage the pursuit of astronomical research. During the time of the donation, C.S. Venable was the chairman of a committee that created a fund of $50,000 to have a director in the observatory. McCormick wrote a letter to the president of the committee describing the conditions associated with its donation. One of the conditions described was to provide the observatory with a trained astronomer, all of whose time should be devoted to the use of the telescope. Also, it was a condition of McCormick that the director of this observatory only taught courses about astronomy. He wanted the person who was in charge to be completely devoted to the study of astronomy. The intention of McCormick in donating the telescope and the conditions he listed along with the donation exhibit his passion for astronomy. He clearly saw the importance of studying this subject and wanted to give students the tools they needed to foster their interest in astronomy. In a letter to Joseph Henry from Washington and Lee, McCormick is described as wanting to place instruments that contribute to astronomical and physical observatory in the state of Virginia. For these reasons, McCormick did not simply donate money or a regular building. Instead, he created a place where people can pursue their passions for astronomical research and where scientific discoveries can be made. The donation of the telescope has led to numerous discoveries and research opportunities. For instance, this is seen through the papers of Ormond Stone. Ormond Stone was the director at the time at which the telescope was donated. Due to this fact, he had to uphold all of the conditions that McCormick listed with his donation. Stone noted multiple observations and performed numerous calculations. Stone wrote data on the Northern Nebulae, which he observed from 1888 to 1891. In addition, he used differential equations to identify unique properties of ellipses. His work demonstrates the accomplishments that have occurred due to the installation of the telescope. Furthermore, the Vanderbilt endowment allowed for Stone to print his publications, which he could not do as efficiently before the extra funds were added. Furthermore, there were 3 scholarships created as a result of the donation, as mentioned in a letter from Dr. James F. Harrison, chairman of the faculty, to Leander McCormick on September 14, 1882. The 3 scholarships were the McCormick and Vanderbilt scholarships and the Corcoran scholarship. These scholarships symbolized the amount of new possibilities that resulted from the donation.